Let's make sure the microphone is on. It is. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 14th episode of SecuriTEA Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security topics. Today, I'm delighted to have Travis McPeak on the show. Travis has over a decade of experience in the security space working at companies such as Symantec, HP, IBM, and Netflix. Travis is one of the OWASP San Francisco chapter organizers. He has advised various security companies and is an angel investor. Travis is currently the head of product security at Databricks. Welcome, Travis. Welcome to the stream.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All good. Thank you for being here today. Um, so obviously, there's a lot of things that would be amazing to hear about from you today. But as it's the largest thing in the world right now, I kind of wanted to segue directly into like Log4j and talk about like what's happening in the world in Log4j and get an understanding from your point of view of someone that's worked in the trenches in the past and also is now, kind of working in a product security role, just kind of your experience on it.
Oh, why did something happen? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, this is a yeah, this is a fun one, right? Because I mean, even if you are not a Java shop, you don't use Log4j yourself, guaranteed you're using something that uses it. And yeah, this is just one of those like scary things where we all found out at the exact same time. So the blue team and the attackers all found out about this thing. Some vulnerabilities are pretty complicated to exploit. You have to do a whole bunch of steps. You have to do ASLR bypass or whatever. This is not one of those. This is just you literally just provide a string and then it calls back to your server and executes the code that it gets. So about as bad as they come. I saw one tweet that said, this is one of the problems with CVSS. In any given month, I look at dozens of vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 9 or above. Uh, this is rated the same 10 as like a whole bunch of those, and obviously those go by without anybody paying a whole lot of attention. And this one, I think most every security person I know has dropped what they are doing, probably worked through a significant part of the weekend on this. So yeah, I mean, this is just one of those cases where systems are all very interconnected, and a vulnerability in one can expand everywhere and really cause impact if you're not on top of it.
Okay. So because it's so bad, like as you've like been in the trenches, I kind of saw this tweet which came from, and you've worked at Netflix in the past, so I kind of wanted to get your perspective on what you kind of thought about this. And the first time I've used Google Meets in a while. So like I'm showing on this on the stream, but you've already seen the tweet that I was going to share. So it basically says like thanks to all the excellent tools from the Netflix engineering platform, today's remediation of Log4j was basically pressing a button. Obviously, most companies are not in that position. So like, what do you see like some companies being able to just press a button versus like most companies now that are kind of like running around, kind of freaking out, trying to like figure out how they're going to fix things?
Totally, yeah. So that I mean, anytime that you build these systems, you invest a lot in testing, repeatable builds. In Netflix, for example, the common state of the art is you have an application in Spinnaker, and you do regular builds. It kind of just builds itself and deploys on a regular basis. We have all of these services like chaos testing that will come knock your service over and make sure that it can restand itself up. So Netflix does a lot of engineering to make sure that things like redeploy and patching are in a pretty good state. And those investments take a lot of time. It detracts from product features, and it really pays off in a case like this, where you want to be able to quickly scan your whole inventory, find out where you might be vulnerable, have a quick simple update, the same as you do dozens of other times a month, and have those things redeployed everywhere. So yeah, I think systems like Netflix. I'm glad to see those paying off. I saw the tweet you're talking about. I actually think there's something the more secret sauce on top of what I just mentioned there. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag for Peter Royal. He's done some cool work over there. So stay tuned to see if he presents that. If it's what I think it is, he's done more work on top of what I just said.
I see. Yeah, there was. I think he's presenting at a conference in the short term, either B-side San Francisco or somewhere. Particular, I remember seeing some of the tweets, so I guess we'll just have to wait for that one. So I think my core question is obviously there's many things that most organizations can do right now. Like what would be like some of the top things? Obviously, you can look at your dependencies and try and update. You can do static analysis to try and find where things might be compromised. You can look at your logs, which it's like a meta login log situation. But like, what can companies do? I think what would be like the core things that companies might want to do for Log4j?
Sure. Yeah. So if you can patch this, so first of all, have an inventory of software. This is kind of requisite zero in security. You should know what you have. Assuming that you have an inventory, then find out where you have Log4j to either directly or transitively. If you have it directly, then I mean I would recommend just doing an update. I say just do an update as if that's like a trivial thing. Like we all know that it's not ever that simple. You can't just update, but you should work your way towards patching the library with all of the testing and reliability stuff that entails. If you can't do that, there's also a Java flag that you can supply, which basically says don't do any message lookups. So this is a nice stopgap until you get to patching. Those are basically it. You do one of those two. There was reports that basically if you have an updated Java version past a certain point, then you're not vulnerable. That's not true. There are gadget chains where if you're running certain kinds of like common libraries like Jackson, you could still be vulnerable to remote code execution. So please, nobody rely on an updated Java version in this case. It's really patch to 2.15 of Log4j2 or supply the Java option that makes it so it doesn't look up messages.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice. I think there's been a lot of, information that's going out, like Cloudflare, like address like a lot of things where they were trying to like put things in the WAF. The same with like Amazon, but I think the long story short is you can't rely on just versioning alone. You can't rely on WAFs because there's always going to be
Bypass.
those
Yeah.
bypasses eventually. I think they're good, like defense in depth features, but I wouldn't say like So I think like you are realistic. Either the application has to include those flags to make sure you're not doing lookups if you need to have that particular feature or you can't update right now, and obviously updating as well. Obviously, if it's a third party service, that's another issue. um, but at the same time, there's who knows what can go on there. So I think yeah,
Sure. Yeah, and egress filtering too. I mean, if you're in a position where you can say no outbound traffic except for things in a specific allow list, then you're sitting pretty. That sounds like nice and simple. Again, like just patch everything. It sounds easy, but there's kind of a lot to it. I think this is probably going to stimulate more people to start making those investments, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see more companies in the space that will help make that transition easier for you.
awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the needed approach right now. I think obviously it's kind of a wake up call for many people. We haven't seen something this serious for well, I guess like a couple of years now. So people have
I
been
think
kind of
Yeah, struts.
yeah, struts. I would say that was the next one. I mean, image tragic was pretty bad too, but that's like a lot. Not that many people were using like image magic, for example. Like there was still a lot of places where it was being used, but nowhere near at the same level as like a Log4j situation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess in both the image magic and Log4j, you're parsing some kind of common user inputs. But yeah, I think to your point, Log4j is just so much more prevalent. Just because you think about, the Java ecosystem, it's one of the most prevalent ways of doing Java logging. And if you have any transitive dependencies that are using this, then you're kind of in trouble. Image magic, you're kind of either using like an image, parsing thing in your application or you're not.
Exactly. All right. So I think, obviously it's obviously a very like dark place right now for a lot of people who have been spending their entire weekend. But obviously there are like things that people can do, and we'll share some of that at the end of the stream. Just like some of the best in practice links of what you might want to do right now. But I want to kind of shift gears, and we have a lot to talk about today. Log4j definitely is an important piece to what's going on in the world right now. But obviously, I would also like to know more about Travis. So I don't want to I want to talk about investing and advising today. Like really, I want that to be the premise, but I would love to kind of hear about your story of how you've worked at all these companies for a long time. You've gone from an individual contributor all the way up to like being a manager, and now you're running head of product security at Databricks. I would love to kind of hear how that journey kind of began. Some of the way you traveled through that and how you ended up getting where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, when I was a kid, I loved security. Just the idea that, there's systems that kind of control. I mean, this is less true when I was a kid, but today there's systems that control every aspect of your life. And these are critical. These things cannot fail. And you have attackers that are trying to exploit bugs. All software has bugs. Some bugs are security bugs, and attackers can use that to do things they're not supposed to do. This kind of, cat and mouse aspect fascinated me even when I was a kid. So I think I was always moving towards this field. Now I got lucky on my timing. I'm 38, so I'm a old millennial. Um, at some point, like right around the time that I was starting to think about a profession, security became a hot industry. I would be doing this even if it wasn't. But because of the demand, we just have way more security jobs that we need than people to fill them. I think there's a lot of kind of on ramps to it. The one that I pursued was I came out of grad school, studied information assurance. So that was like a nice security fundamental background. Then started at work at Symantec as a QA. QA really one, it tests that kind of attacker mindset. You're doing the same thing. You're trying to find bugs at efficiently and at scale. And it was really a good place to kind of hone that automation craft. For anybody that is thinking about how to get into security, I would definitely recommend check out automation. I think you'll be able to cover so much more ground if you can at least write a script to test out your ideas. So that was how I got my start. Then moved into full time security roles in 2013. I've been doing stuff ever since. I've noticed the other day that I'm working my way towards progressively smaller companies. So, Symantec, HP, IBM, those are huge companies. Those were my first few. Then I was at Netflix in 2017 through this year. And that was at the time the smallest company I'd ever been a part of. And now I'm at Databricks, which is even smaller. So at some point, I'll probably be at like a two-person company.
I think I did the opposite. One of my first ones was like at a small company like Digital, and now I work at Salesforce. So it's it's, it's a lot bigger than what I would expect. But that's pretty awesome. And so what was the transition like for you from like so you were at Netflix for quite a while. You were working primarily in an IC role, and then from at least what this is what my LinkedIn tells you, you transitioned into a senior, a manager role, and then obviously you moved into Databricks. So what did that kind of look like? The transition there.
Yeah, totally. So one thing, I think there's a misconception in the industry that everybody should move to management as a way to continue their career growth. I would heavily recommend people don't think of it that way. This is not, a promotion. It's not an upgrade. It's just a different kind of job. So there are things, that are advantages of both jobs. As an IC, you can really go heads down, work on a technical project, hopefully for huge blocks of time. You build something with your bare hands, you see the impact it has. The success criteria for management is totally different. You're not going to probably go heads down and build something, at least not if you're doing your job correctly. It looks more like helping your organization, to do the right stuff, like come up with the right strategic projects, help unblock people on your team. And so the success you get is much more through other people. For me, I feel most rewarded now when I either hire somebody awesome for the team or when somebody on my team delivers something amazing or when I clear a problem that someone had so that they can do their best work. So, definitely not for everybody. I would definitely recommend people think about this before they get into management. And then, if it's not the easiest transition. Managers have, the industry jargon is like a big blast radius, right? If I'm a terrible manager, I really impact my whole team. So people, don't really want to give you your first management gig. It's easiest to transition in a place that you already work versus trying to get a first time manager gig, from a new company. So for people that are interested in that, definitely talk to your leadership, tell them what you're interested in. uh, you know, there's not enough people in security. Everyone wants to retain their best talent. I think it's important to communicate and say, hey, this is what growth looks like for me. I really want to try management and try to get the opportunity internally. And we can talk about it later. But there's like skills that you can start learning in your IC role to make that easier for
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, there's I've seen a lot of people say like people don't leave companies; they normally leave like bad leadership, which is obviously definitely one of those things. And like I think a lot of people do like to just stay in the IC realm. There are some people that just want to like be like a principal in like a company and just be doing like really like technical work. But I definitely see like a very like good value of being able to like promote my or like at least not promote, but kind of the work that I do kind of help evolve the other people's careers as well. So that could also just be from an IC position as well, but it's kind of advocating for themselves, like for them as well, which is what I kind of see like as an important piece for, at least from the way that I've been treating my career, like building things to help other people succeed, or working with people and making sure that when you're giving feedback, it's actually like going to help them with their career, kind of.
totally, yeah. And I mean, the way I would think about it is, what are the core tasks that you like doing? So, like for example, if you like giving advice to people in their career, but you don't like recruiting, for example, then maybe what you want to be is like a technical lead. And some companies have a pretty well established technical lead track. So, part of your job is you will mentor more junior folks. You'll get them unblocked. You'll help them develop new skills, but you don't have to do some of the management things that you may not like. So the sooner that people can identify like what makes them happy and what kind of stuff they want to do day to day, then you can gear your path correctly.
Awesome. So I'm going to segue into investing now and advising. So you have, obviously, throughout your time of working in your career, you've started to like invest into companies, and obviously also be part of like advisory boards to help other companies like either build their roadmap out or improve those things. Some people might not know what that is. So like they might not know what people do for security companies as an advisor, and they also may not know what they do as an investor. So could you kind of like break some of those components down and talk about what you've done, and also like how you got started?
Totally. Yeah. So I'll give kind of a high level view and then you can guide me towards, whatever you think folks would be interested in. I could talk about this for days. So
Okay.
if I get going on a tangent, just stop me. So yeah, first of all, 3 years ago, I didn't know about any of this stuff either. I was always fascinated with the business side of it, but I didn't really know how do startups work because I always worked at big companies. I didn't really know how do VCs work. How are companies evaluated? How do you raise money and stuff like that? And so I just kind of I went on this journey that I wanted to learn about all that stuff. And first thing I did, I started to try to meet VCs. In fact, I asked some friends and I said, "Hey, do you know any VCs that you could introduce me to?" And I remember the first time I met a VC, I was so clueless. I basically was just I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't know what my value prop was. I just started saying a bunch of stuff. And I remember he stopped me like 5 minutes in, and he said, "Wait, who are you? What the f do you want?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Like this sounds like I'm trying to sell something." So since then, I've learned basically that there's kind of two aspects to this. There's the advising and investing are both differently. In both cases, you're going to help a startup in some way, and usually by bringing on some skill set that they really need, but maybe can't hire for full time. Of course, investing. Startups need money to execute their plan, right? If you're a tiny company, Lewis has an awesome idea. Uh, you can't build it by yourself because you need to get this thing off the ground quicker than you could build the whole product by yourself, or you don't have the skill set. You're going to raise money so that you can do things like hire people. And so investors fill that role. There's major investors like VCs. They're going to cut you your big checks. They're going to what's called lead you around. So set the terms, kind of set up the whole legal structure around the money raise and all of that kind of stuff. And then around that, there's angel investors, which are smaller checks, and they're typically, especially these days when the capital markets are very competitive. So there's more people trying to invest in companies than there are great companies to invest in. And so angel investors can typically get into deals that maybe they wouldn't otherwise by providing some strategic value. So this is the way that angel investors and advisors are similar in this respect is that somebody like you, Lewis, like you could work with a startup and say, hey, um, I've seen a whole bunch of security pitches. I'll help you craft your message. I'll help you get the right product features. I'll do intros if it makes sense, things like that. Those are both ways that you can provide that value, and then you can either give them money in exchange for equity, which would be the angel investing route, or you can give your time in exchange for equity, which is the advising route.
And so, how did you? Obviously, you said you started talking to a bunch of VCs, and like just they didn't know what you didn't know what the hell you were talking about at the beginning. But like, how did it? How did you find your first few opportunities once you got past that initial? I'm actually going to tell you like what I need to do rather than what I'm trying to sell.
Yeah. So first, I had at that point, so this is like late 2018, I had already been in a buy decision for security products for quite a while. And so, one piece of value that I can add is like, let me help you craft your pitch. Like I have people reaching out to me all the time to try to sell me security product. And some of those look compelling and some don't. So I can help a company to craft a message. So the first company I advised is called Avitao. They're a really cool company based out of Hungary. And they're doing developer education. They're still around. I don't advise them anymore, but they're awesome. And yeah, so they basically the whole job there was to help them make the most compelling product possible and help them sell it to the kind of people that they wanted to sell to. So, what are engineering managers that are responsible for security? Like, what are they looking for in a product like this? How do people pick a product like this? Like, what are the evaluation criteria? What do people that don't have a product like this do? How big of a problem is this? is there anything similar around that we might be able to integrate into the product? These are all questions that I just able to help them with strategic direction in exchange for equity.
That's really cool. So I always called them Avato, so I think I've been pronouncing it wrong for such a such a long time. Okay. Um, so now that you've been doing it for a while, like what kind of companies do you normally usually invest in, and like what would you kind of like guide people to do? Obviously you mentioned like things that Is that always the case, or do you sometimes like deviate away from that general mission?
Yeah. So I guess, well, like one more thing on the advising front, there's kind of two ways that you can do it. One is, at least for a security person, or a security company, it's a company that's selling a security product, help with the things I mentioned, like strategy, outreach, things like that. And then there's also, I don't know what it's actually called, but it's like basically zero security hire work, which is where you do work for a non-security company. You help them get up to speed on like what security stuff should they care about, what do they need to hire, what should a program look like, actually help them do the hire, and then sometimes stay on in a mentorship role. So that second category is what I did for Cockroach Labs, for example. And I think that that's for security folks out there that are interested. This is a big opportunity. So many companies now need security, but they just really just don't know like what they need. So you can sit with the founders and help them to understand what should they be thinking about, what is the right size security program for them. And then, sorry, I forgot, what was your original question you just asked me?
No, no, it's fine. We'll go back to that. Actually, I'm quite intrigued by that one because, right, because like a lot of the time, people might think about advising security companies. It's normally just, hey, we have a product we're trying to sell. Like what, like someone's like time might be like we're developers, and like I've been like doing this from a developer point of view for a long time, and I can offer this kind of value. But it's not like companies that are building up for the first time that need security guidance or like input, which like how do you build out that program and stuff when they can't really afford to do it by hiring someone full time. I think it's pretty valuable. So normally like would you have to get normally recommendations from people to be able to get into that space, or already just have some kind of reputable place? Like where would you start looking for that kind of position?
Yeah, so I mean, the companies that need this, one, they may not know that they need it, and two, they may not know who you are. So you kind of need the two aspects of it. You need to find companies that are already aware of this problem, or find somebody that they trust that can, mention the problem. And having some kind of like network is everything. I love building a network. I'm an extrovert, so I love to meet new people. I love having a network because I can make serendipitous intros. Two people that don't know each other, I know both of them. Having them meet and help each other is great for me. But having the network also helps because now, if somebody needs this, somebody might know me and might be able to say, "Oh, Travis can help," and do an intro for me. So yeah, in the case of Cockroach Labs, I was introduced by a really good VC relationship that I have. And so at the point when they were wondering about how to start security, uh, then I just, they said, "Hey, talk to Travis." So um, I would say, try to really build those relationships with people that kind of deal with startups. Another one that I have a really good relationship with is Code Red Partners. They're a security headhunter firm that's everywhere now. And so something that we have is, if you bring on Code Red Partners to make your first security hire, they will bring on me or somebody like me as a service to help kind of calibrate strategy, design the interview process, and actually do the interviews. If you think about it, if you're a founder or a VP of engineering or something, you don't really know security. Like, how do you test those skills, right? Like, it's so easy to say the right buzzwords and have it sound good, but it actually doesn't mean anything. So I think having a trusted security person can be really helpful for a startup.
That's actually, I've never even kind of considered that just because I've never looked into that space really, but that I think that's going to make a lot of sense for a lot of people, and I think that's like super valuable, from like at least like a we need to make sure that we're actually hiring the right people, and at least like some people might go in with a different vision, and that's fine. But sometimes people might just go and do the wrong thing, and if someone can kind of at least guide them to do the way that they've been seeing it successful in other companies and other organizations, then it's probably on for a win. So
Totally.
so yeah, so that was, I think, I think that
You
you kind
mentioned
of.
the you, you
Mm.
mentioned the investing stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll touch on that briefly.
Hmm.
So first of all, the rule of thumb for a venture is that it's super risky. So don't invest any, like think about the stock market, right? If you invest in Google, the chance that your Google investment is going to go to zero is pretty low. That happens sometimes with companies like Enron, but typically public companies do not go to zero. In venture, actually, the whole business is built around, most startups fail and fail spectacularly. So there's a very real chance that you're going to invest money in a company and it's not going to give you anything in return. So, rule number one, don't invest more than you can afford to lose. In fact, venture investors have to be accredited, which means, basically the government thinks that you're not going to be taken advantage of. So there's like some kind of minimum, either annual income or net wealth that you need to have to get into it. So you should calculate like how much you're willing to put in. So, for example, you might say, I'm willing to risk 5% of my net worth as on venture investments. And if you have $1 million, then 5% is going to be 50,000. And you don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. A
Hmm.
lot of companies, will just go to zero. So I recommend some kind of diversification. So let's say you had the $50,000, you might decide to spread that out across 5 companies. That means that your check size can be $10,000. So that's kind of how to work backwards from that. And the way it works is, um, so typically, like early stage companies will raise with what's called a SAFE. This is a standard something agreement for future equity. It basically means you're putting in money, and they're going to punt on the question of future valuation until they raise their next round. So we don't, we're putting in money. You're going to get some equity at some point. We don't know how much equity you're going to get. We'll give you, for example, a discount. You will pay like 90% of the rate that the future investors pay because you're putting in your money earlier. So that's a common way to invest. And yeah, if you think about, if it's like a $15 million round for a company, which might be a common seed valuation these days,
Hmm.
and you put in 10,000, you're going to get whatever that is, 0.00 something percent. So
Yep.
um, this is not. I wouldn't think of this as a way to get super rich. I mean, a great venture outcome is 5, 10x. Sometimes there are like 100, 1,000x returns, but I wouldn't recommend that anybody count on this. Like really, the way I think about this is one, it's for my education. I love to help startups. It's fun for me. I learn a bunch of stuff. I do not think of this as the thing that's going to make me rich, and I definitely don't count on having this money at any point in the future. Venture investments are tied up, typically for like 10 years. They're illiquid, and a lot of them are going to go to zero.
Yep. Totally. Totally makes sense. I think that's an important, piece. It's the same thing as like just putting money into the stock market, as you said. Like if you like, who knows what's going to happen with that money? You could get a return. You might lose everything. Especially with the market so volatile these days, and there's always new security companies cropping up. But that's a question I have for you: is from what I've seen, like the industry, the amount of companies that are coming up, everyone seems to be doing pretty well in the startup scene right now in the security space. Like maybe I'm naive, but like, what have you seen in the space from your point of view? Someone that is investing into companies, like, is everyone doing great right now, or is it kind of like fake news, and I'm looking at it through a different lens?
No, I mean, yeah. So this is not just constrained to security companies. Security is obviously a hot industry right now, but the way that the way these valuations are set is it works back from the public market. So if you see public market companies, you see the eventual the valuation that the public market gives to those companies, then you can kind of track your way back. So a public company may come out at after like a few raises of money, you can say, okay, we're halfway to this other public company's milestones in terms of revenue and growth and things like that. So you kind of like hand wavy, do some guesses based on comps. The same way if you were trying to evaluate like what's a fair offer for this house I'm trying to buy, you would look at similar houses around. And so what's happened is the public markets have gone up so much, especially in the last 18 months since COVID, right? The stock market's on fire. We're seeing, whatever, 35% growth rate per year.
Hmm.
And this has trickled all the way down through the rounds to the early stage companies. And there's more capital trying to go in than there is great companies to invest in, like I mentioned earlier. So some of these deals are getting pretty competitive, and that also pushes the valuation up. So valuations look very high for these companies. They also have not, had like a liquidity event. They haven't, until they're public companies or they get purchased by another company, the valuation is all speculative. So I haven't seen a ton of gigantic exits. There are some pretty nice exits, but some of the multiples now make me a little bit nervous. I wonder like how will these companies ever exit for anything close to what their forecasted valuation is.
Yeah, that's always like a pretty dangerous place to be. That's why like obviously going to startups in general sometimes can be really risky because you can invest all of your time for a few years, go work, as an IC at a startup, and it either, you get initial stock and they have a lot more seed rounds, and then your stock is worthless towards the end because they, you didn't get bumped up or something from additional contributions towards the stock, contributions, which can be quite dangerous, I think, as well.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that can happen. First of all, the market conditions can change. The like macro, the whole market goes down.
Mhm.
Valuations are lower, the stock market's lower, people avoiding growth stocks, things like that. Things can happen to the specific industry that you're in. If you're a security company and you're handling um, like Lambda security or something like that was like a really hot space a few years ago. I haven't seen as much attention from it lately.
Mhm.
You can get very competitive. So, you're in a hot space now and you're by yourself, and then 10 other companies enter the market. Or you can just have, just execution problems. So, you're in a hot space, you're the right company, you've got the right strategy or whatever, but some of your key hires aren't great and, lead the company down a bad path. And the company kind of fails to deliver on its promise. So these are all risks, and these should be like baked into the valuation, right? Like the company could look great, but a whole bunch of stuff can happen between now and an exit.
Super interesting. It's definitely stuff I never had even thought about, to be honest. Um, so I have a question for you around like how much time do you normally invest into like each company that you're either, advising, or like when I say like, time you invest, I don't see like, I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about time. So like how much time do you normally put into like companies that you're advising, or like if you're looking to invest into a place, how much time do you initially do? Like what is the ongoing time that you normally advise, or is that always variable?
Yeah, I mean, so the standard kind of, the industry standard is like 2 to 4 hours a month for an advisor position. This is all variable and it changes, based on like what does the company need. So, for every company that I advise, I've had times where, where I'm more involved, especially towards the beginning, it tends to be that way where it's like they're trying to get as much information out of my head as they can. And then we get into like a more steady state where I just, help them with like tactical things. So I would say variable. For any company that I advise, I will spend, within reason, whatever time that I need to help them on their way. But yeah, generally 2 to 4 hours a month, sometimes more, sometimes less, and depending on how far into the advising situation I am and how much stuff they're doing and where they need my help.
Got it. And I think we kind of talked about this before. Obviously you talked about like don't put in how much you got. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, said be right back. So, yep.
Sorry about that.
No,
You good?
no. Yeah, yeah, we're all good. Everything still looks good on the stream. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So my next question was basically like, obviously you mentioned like you only really should invest how much you can provide, like 50 grand or something like that, and split it up between different and diversify your assets kind of thing. But is there normally like a minimum that you can put in? Like obviously, like there is the concept of angel investing, and then there's obviously normal investors and VCs, etc. Um, like what is the normal like requirement or minimum that people will normally do, or at least kind of invest into?
It really depends. So I think, for some companies, if you're investing directly in them, then it can be 5 or 10,000 is what I've seen. Another way that folks can get into it though is through a syndicate. So if you go to Angels List, for example, Angel List, there's syndicates that you can join, and the way a syndicate works is you'll have a manager, and they go and source deals, and then they offer it to the syndicate. So you'll get an email and say, here's the company that we're considering. Here's our thesis. This is why we think it's interesting. Here's the risks, and then you can choose to invest or not. Sometimes because they're rolling up a whole bunch of investments into one, the minimum there can be lower. I've seen as low as $1,000. So if you have less, if you decide that 5% or whatever you want to invest, you have less than 50 grand, I would definitely advise people to go down the syndicate route.
So with a syndicate, do you still need to become accredited investor before that, or does it not really matter?
Yeah, I believe those are also for accredited investor. Yeah.
I got it. Because I know there's like two ways to, normally become an accredited investor, have like a bunch of money where you can already show capital, or, go down a path where I think it's like $100,000 in revenue or something. I don't know what the actual requirement
Yeah,
is, but
I think it's 200,000 in income for the last 2 years or something like that. Talk to your tax advisor.
talk to your tax advisor. This is purely all speculative information right now. Okay. Um, yeah, so that's an interesting point. So, um, and like again, like how much do you know, like obviously this is also a risk too, because like how much do the syndicates actually take on top of that for like being able to broker all of this? I'm guessing that's all just you have to go and check out the syndicate to see that type of or,
Yeah, it'll depend. So yeah, those are like the typical, structures. But common one is 2 and 20, which means 2% of the money they take as a management fee. This covers like overhead and things like this, and then 20% is what's called a carry. This is how VCs are most commonly compensated. So the way it works is, let's say I put in $10,000. Uh, a fund invests $10,000 and then they get 50,000 back. So 40,000 is the profit. Carry of 20% means that the VC fund takes 20% of the 40,000. It's called carried interest, and basically it's just it incentivizes you to make better returns for your investors.
got it. Okay. So obviously, you've talked about a lot of different things, about angel investing. You've talked about like how you might advise companies and get equity from that. But like, what are some of the best resources that you've seen for looking at like some of this stuff? I know, like obviously, and I can share the your tweet that you've done on this as well, just in case people want to see it. But like, what are some of like the getting started resources you might want to recommend to people?
Yeah, totally. There's a book called Secrets of Sand Hill Road. I believe it's Scott Kapoor. He is the managing partner at Andreessen Horowitz. And yeah, that's a really good book that really explains kind of how VCs operate. It would be good from both a founder perspective and an investor perspective. There's also Jason Calacanis is a very well known angel investor. He has some good resources. Angel University is one. It's an online course. I think it's like 4 hours or something. Highly recommend that. I would definitely suggest that folks go and check out some syndicates, on Angel List if they're interested in doing investments. And then, Twitter, of course, like, follow people that are doing this kind of stuff. Really like what I would advise is try to get familiar with how people think about doing investments. So, like, if you do nothing else, try to read a bunch of investment theses so that you can think about all of the factors that go into smart investors deciding if they want to invest in a company or not. And if you want to do it and you don't have any money, you can always just kind of do it for a play. You can say, okay, I'm going to write on a sheet that I invested in this company and track outcomes over time. Of course, it's kind of different when you don't have real money on the line, but you can always just kind of do the simulated version of it.
That's awesome. So we'll share those. We'll share some links after the stream on the YouTube, so people can on the YouTube. I sound so old.
The YouTube.
On the TikTok, yeah. So yeah, so we have the wonderful Twitch leaf in the chat saying the 200K thing is right, or 1 million in assets. So again, this is just all speculation. Just talk to your tax advisor. So I kind of want to talk, kind of shift away from the investing side of things and advising side of things, because you kind of talked about it kind of briefly at the beginning, and you talked about like how you're an extrovert and like being able to like meet connections and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about OWASP.
Yeah.
uh, so I'm obviously no longer living in the Bay Area, but I still kind of get involved in as much as I can. OWASP San Francisco, and obviously you're one of the main chapter leads for OWASP San Francisco. How did you kind of get kind of involved into that, and at the beginning, and how has that evolved over time, because you do the North Bay and the South Bay, and obviously like what have you kind of seen from that space over time, being able to like meet people in the same industry from OWASP?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I'm not actively involved in OWASP Bay Area anymore. I've handed it off to some very capable folks, specifically Prashant,
Okay.
Brendan Higgins, and Wendy Segura are handling the chapter now. And there, there's a bunch of other people that do great work as well. Folks like Tad and others. So really, the way I got involved in 2016, I'd spent some time out of the Bay Area and I moved back and I really wanted awesome security meetups. Like you said, like you said, I said, I'm an extrovert. I like to meet people. I get energy from building my network. And so to me, an awesome Thursday night seems like, go see some awesome conference talks, meet some cool people, talk about interesting things. So I wanted that product to exist. And surprisingly, given the amount of security talent and companies we have in the Bay Area, there wasn't there weren't as much regular meetups as I hoped there would be. But I did find OWASP Bay Area, which was being run by Michael Coates at the time. Uh, Michael Coates, awesome person, also extremely busy. I think he was the chief security officer at Twitter,
Mhm.
and he's got a family and a whole bunch of other stuff going on. So he was, essentially like running these things by himself. And he put out a call for help and said, "Hey, who wants to help create OWASP meetups?" And a whole bunch of us kind of came and to answered his call. And I think I just, because of my persistence and doggedness, I just ended up pushing. And then when Michael was ready to step away, he said, "Hey, who wants to step up?" And I said, "Me, me, me." He said, "Okay, Travis, you're it." So that was where it all started. I ran the chapter pretty actively for 4 years. Now I think there's room for other people to do it. I got a ton from OWASP. I want those same opportunities for other people. So, really, if you enjoy meeting folks and you want to produce meetups that where people learn cool stuff and meet cool people, I would recommend support your local OWASP chapter or project.
Yeah, I mean, I would class myself as like an introverted extrovert. So I have very specific bursts of energy that I can give to like a public space, and then I have to go and retreat into a corner for like 6 hours. So so yeah, but I remember like when I obviously was used to be heavily involved at the for at least like six, I think it was like 6 to 7 months, maybe like close to a year. Pre-COVID, we used to always go there, and you can kind of get involved in various different ways. So like you can be the MC, so the person that has I think I had a successful job at doing that because I have such dry humor, and it's kind of like witty on the side, hopefully. So it kind
Yeah.
of works, and people like that. And then obviously you have someone like dealing with the recordings, the AV sometimes as well as necessary, and then obviously just helping people through. So I think there's many ways to get involved, and I think finding speakers is probably one of the hardest components, I think,
Gi-
for running a
give,
meetup.
give me a second. It got dark in here. This is like more of a hacker dungeon than I'm intending right now. Let me turn on a light.
No, this is why you have to invest into a kind of like a key light or something. That's you know
Yeah, that was like helping my hacker MO, isn't it? Just like throw the hoodie up, I'm ready for hacking.
I mean, we did talk about Log4j for like 10 minutes, so I think it's only I should have turned my light down, to be honest. Um, yeah, so I have a question for you, like primarily around just what you're doing. Are you attending any interesting? Question.
I was just trying to reset my camera. Everything looked yellow. There we
Much
go.
better. Are you
Yeah.
attending any interesting conferences or meetups in the near future where people may be able to connect with you? And if they can, like if you aren't, how can people connect with you in general?
Oh, I miss conferences and meetups. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to go to stuff. Hopefully, fingers crossed, like COVID's getting into a better state here. Vaccines will work. We're not going to get any more variants or anything. So yeah, I'm looking forward to conferences. I haven't been to any in a while. I did do a CISO summit for Hermetic, which is one of the companies I advised last week. It was like my first, toe into the water of things again. But yeah, I would look forward to something like B-Side San Francisco if that'll be in person. I don't have anything planned, but I hope to see everybody soon. Get a hold of me, LinkedIn, Twitter, the usuals.
And if there were two, let's just say like there's someone starting in their career for the first, like, beginning into like security, like what would be some of like the I guess 3 life lessons you might be able to distill to them? And we'll, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, awesome question. I love that. So this is definitely not you study it once and then you're done. Like you rest on your knowledge. This is like continuous learning things. So hopefully that sounds exciting to people. But for like new folks, it's like learn how to ramp up quickly on something, and kind of like relish that, like, oh, I don't know anything about this, and I'm trying to get up to speed because that is the job. I like kind of automation stuff, like I mentioned. I think one of the ways that I got started was a book called Violent Python, which is it uses Python to do cool things like spoofing packets and password brute forcing and things like that. So this kind of like blends two things that I like, which is scripting and security stuff. I found that book fun. I've given that book to probably 10 or 15 people starting, and I get good feedback about it. And yeah, network is everything. So having to apply through the front door of a job is the worst way to get a job. You're despite the fact that we need a bunch of security talent, it's really hard to comb through 500 resumes and find the best people. I think everybody that has to do something like this, or has done something like that, understands that it's fatiguing. So, what I would vastly prefer to do is use my network. Think about like, oh, who do I know? Lewis. Lewis is awesome. Like, let's get him over here. Or other folks, because just kind of I know that they can already do the job. So your job as a new person is going to be to meet those people. So how do you do that? Go to conferences, get used to meeting people, get used to introducing yourself. You can do conference talks, or otherwise publish your work. Like for example, the podcast that you're doing. This is awesome, right? Like great way to build a network, great way to build a personal brand. As you learn about something, like write a blog, write notes, help other people to follow in your footsteps. Those are all kind of good way. Or open source, find some open source project and contribute to it, or create a new open source project. Anything that you can do that's not a job itself. People can't stop you from writing a blog post or open source. You can just do these things, and then sometimes they take a life of their own. One of the ways I got started, really in the industry, was I was fortunate enough to be early on a project called Bandit, and some folks knew about my work in Bandit, and that helped me to get the next few jobs. So I would definitely recommend, rather than like studying lead code and trying to go through the front door, I would recommend working on a network and finding some way to build your personal brand.
And that's kind of sage advice. I didn't know you actually worked on Bandit. That was the way you could like import lots of different scanning tools, right? And it was the kind of like wrapper around all of that stuff.
No,
Oh,
Bandit is a linter for Python.
oh, I didn't. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I know there's like all these other tools that also. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Oh, that's why, because it leveraged Bandit. That's where I'm getting confused. There was a different tool that was basically wrapping all the other linters and security tools
Oh, is that
into one.
R2C's one?
I don't think it was
And
R2C. It was a long time ago.
okay,
It was before the wonderful R2C came into existence. But yeah,
they had Bento. Yeah, that was kind of like one of those things too.
I think that's the best. Like obviously, building your network I think is huge. Like I think most of my positions, uh, yeah, I think Leaf just put it in the chat. Gauntlet, that's the one. That's what I was thinking
Oh,
of. Yeah,
Gauntlet. Yeah.
Gauntlet. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've looked at those kind of things. Just came to my mind when I heard Bandit. Obviously, building a network is huge. I think like most of my positions that I've walked into like has basically been through like going to meetups. So like my first ever like industry job was because I went to the OWASP Leeds in the United Kingdom, and basically was just very aggressive at like going there, like trying to meet a bunch of people and stuff. And then like through that network, I was able to like go and get my first consulting job in the UK, and then eventually like just going to like other conferences and going up to like SecuriTEA. That's how I met one of my good friends now, Grant Douglas, who basically introduced me to Digital at the time to be able to go and get those jobs. So I think having a network is very huge to your career, and having a play. It doesn't have to be like obviously people have different priorities, and sometimes they can't contribute to open source, or they can't do X, Y, and Z. But I think just the network is obviously key. I think, but at the same time, just having somewhere where you can share your knowledge and have that, because it is a continuously learning field. If you don't have some place to like continue to like document and expand your own like kind of like mindset and work, that's the way to like succeed, I think, in this industry.
Totally. Yeah, and it's you can never, like, in retrospect, you can go back like you just did and say like, oh, this person led me to this thing, to that, but you'll never forecast how it's going to work,
Yeah,
from the present. So just make as many connections as you can, say yes to as many kind of random things as you can, and some of those things that end up leading to awesome opportunities will surprise you.
awesome. I think on that note, I think it's time to end the stream. But Travis, I do appreciate your time. I think you probably gave some people like some ideas of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't dump all my money into like Robinhood now. Maybe I should maybe I should think about like investing that stuff. And obviously, from the investing front, it's good to know that like your skill set that you have can lead you on to potential like equity in companies from like the knowledge that you've built over your career. So it's really good to kind of like understand how all that works.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to chat about this stuff. If folks have any questions, get a hold of me on the internet.
Yeah, so get him on the internet, it's on the TikTok. So yeah, again, yeah, thanks, Travis. And this was episode 14 of SecuriTEA Crumpets. See you next time for episode 15.
Thank you.